Cultivating a spiritual garden in the minds and lives of black men. The ego opposes all appreciation, all recognition, all sane perception and knowledge. If you keep in mind what the Spirit offers you, you cannot be vigilant for anything but God. A Course in Miracles. Seeds must be planted in the garden. The planted seed must be nurtured with commitment and care. The care includes inspection and elimination of destructive pests and the uprooting of weeds. Self-defeating thoughts and behaviors are destructive in the minds and lives of black men. People who judge, criticize, blame, and find fault are pests. They cannot be ignored. They must be eliminated from your mind and heart, from your mental, emotional, and spiritual environment. Cultivating a garden is a time-consuming process. As it relates to spirituality, most of us can intellectually see the need to embrace certain spiritual practices. However, we are just as ready to admit, I don't have time. I have too many other things to do. In effect, we are saying that other things are more important than the cultivation and care of the source of our lives, the Spirit. The intellect retorts, no, that's not what I'm saying. However, the moment an opportunity to make overtime money presents itself, prayer and meditation go right out the window. Spirituality is a lifetime commitment. It is a way of life that requires a consistent effort of daily practice, or at the very least, a daily consciousness of spiritual principles and values. For black men who have been conditioned to make money, get things, be better, have more, spirituality may seem like a time-consuming luxury. For those of you with a decent job, a decent home, goals and dreams, who are living in a certain comfort zone, you may believe, I don't need spiritual practices or teachings. If you go to church, if your children are fairly stable, if your health is good, you may question the practical benefits of looking for anything more than you have. For those of you who fit into this category, the issue is, how do you feel? Are you peaceful or stressed out? Are you open and forgiving, or do you hold grudges and seek revenge? Are you an opinionated screamer who sees how ridiculously people behave? Are you loving and accepting of everyone? Whether you have a BMW in the driveway or ride the iron horse, the question becomes, can I feel better, be better than I am now? Evolution of the consciousness and betterment of the being are the goal of spiritual consciousness, which can only be cultivated in the garden of your heart and mind. There are certain universal truths black men will need to understand in order to free yourselves from the grips of the 400-year-old lesson of oppression. There are certain universal truths black men will need to understand in order to free yourselves from the grips of the 400-year-old lesson of oppression. You must cultivate your garden in order to have a good crop. The garden includes the mind, body, and spirit. If you continue to hate white men, be angry in response to injustice, and challenge systems and structures with hate or fear, you will in effect contribute to the already existing imbalances in the spiritual weeds. Let me repeat that. If you continue to hate white men, be angry in response to injustice, and challenge systems and structures with hate or fear, you will in effect contribute to the already existing imbalances and spiritual weeds. If you continue to respond in physical domination with physical aggression, the cycle of fear, anger, hate, and greed will never end. If the black man is in fact the father of all human civilizations, you then have the responsibility to do whatever is necessary to ensure the evolution and survival of the human family. Let me repeat. If the black man is in fact the father of all human civilizations, you then have the responsibility to do whatever is necessary to ensure the evolution and survival of the human family. Black men must therefore reestablish themselves as the spiritual foundation upon which the entire world community can stand. That you are frightened, angry, and unstable is a difficult concept for anyone to accept. It defies the intellect. You have been taught that fear is indicative of weakness. Black men do not easily admit to weakness. The intellectual response is to lay blame and respond in defiance. The intellect says, if somebody hits you, hit back. It is, however, the intellect that ultimately becomes imbalanced. In response to unfulfilled desires, fears, and miseducation, the intellect will respond to fear with fear, to anger with anger. The intellect is polluted by the sights, sounds, and judgments of the physical world. The intellect cannot see spirit, so the intellect does not know spirit. The intellect does what it is programmed to do. The human experience provides motivation for intellectual decisions. The intellect is programmed to conquer and control. The intellect views forceful intimidation as a useful tool. The brain interprets fear as a useful tool for conquering the individual will, leading to submission. Consequently, all human beings are programmed to fear, resent, and seek selfish control of one another. We want to do to them what they did to us. If you could do it to them, you would have already done it. Perhaps it's time for black men to consider another approach to life and living. I believe it's time for them to retill the soil, plant new seeds, and harvest a different kind of crop. If you take the focus off of having money and getting things, if you surrender anger to understanding, fear to acceptance, and hate to love, the universe will respond by bringing you more of what you focus on. The new seeds you plant will produce a way of life created in the silent power of spirit, a power that is unlimited and unhindered by human beings of any race. When black men shift from the intellect to the spirit, you are bound to find a new way of life. This will be a life dedicated to peace, joy, and compassion. It is the kind of life that our earliest ancestors knew. A life centered on the omnipotent power and presence of God. From all that I have been taught, seen, and experienced in my own shift, God is good all the time, no matter what anyone else says or does. The payoff of unlimited goodness for an indefinite period sure sounds like something worth working towards. The Parable of the Acorns. Acorns, A-C-O-R-N-S. The Parable of the Acorns. There was once a very large community of acorns living in a mighty oak tree. From birth, the acorns had been taught that their ultimate purpose in life was to achieve the highest level of acornness, represented by a highly polished shell. To help them achieve this, the acorn leaders established acorn health clubs, acorn beauty parlors, and acorn shell polishing institutions. All acorns were expected to master the ability to keep their shells polished and assist other acorns in developing their skills to do the same. Some acorns were not satisfied. They did not believe that life should be limited to self-polishing and helping others learn how to polish. These acorns were resented and criticized by the majority. It's not nice to have your complacency disturbed, your comfort zone challenged. They would shout at the doubtful acorns, "Hey, this is the way it's always been. Why are you asking those stupid questions? Who are you to question anyway?" The doubtful acorns explained that they had noticed some things that the acorn leaders had not explained. They had become aware that no matter how highly polished an acorn was, there came a time when it would fall from the tree. The shell would crack, moisture would seep in, and cause what was known as acorn death. If all acorns had to die no matter how polished their shells were, why should they spend their lives polishing their shells? These questions came to the attention of the acorn priest. They stepped forward to reassure all the acorns. It had been revealed to them, they said, that if an acorn obeyed all the commands of the priest and leaders, kept its shell highly polished, paid its taxes and tithes, when the acorn died, it would be transported to acorn heaven. Once there, no acorn ever has to worry about falling or losing its luster. There'll be warm breezes forever, and every acorn would sit at the right hand of the acorn god and receive acorn immortality. To assure the acorns of their rightful place in acorn heaven, there was a ritual priests would do, for a small fee, of course. Whenever an acorn fell, the priest would perform special rites on the ground in the exact place the acorn had fallen. The following spring, if a plant grew in that spot, the remaining acorn family would know that the deceased acorn had made it to heaven. The acorns were once again reassured and went back to polishing their shells. As time went on, there came to this acorn community a new acorn who described himself as an acorn prophet. The acorn prophet began to hold nightly meetings at which he told the acorns who gathered that they had been misled by the priests and leaders. The acorn prophet revealed that inside every acorn lived a mighty oak. According to the prophet, the purpose of acorn life was to grow into oakness. He further explained that falling to the ground was simply a step in the process. To become an oak, it would be necessary to stop being an acorn. The falling process actually was the beginning of a new life. The prophet said each acorn owed it to the world to develop itself through hard work, loving gestures, and deliberate concentration to become a mighty oak tree. While many of the acorns thought the message was pretty far-fetched, they could not help but to be drawn to the acorn prophet. His words were so loving, although it was evident from his lackluster appearance they had not been to the acorn beauty parlor in a while. Still, he had a glow. More than a luster, his glow seemed to come from the inside. He explained it was his oakness and that every acorn had the same ability. All they had to do was believe, work on their purpose in life, and never fear the fall from the tree. When the acorn priest heard of the tales being told by the acorn prophet, they were extremely upset. He'll ruin our business. We had better do something quick. They did. They called together a group of acorn scientists and ordered them to launch an immediate investigation to refute the acorn prophet's theory. The acorn scientists gathered many acorns, upon which they conducted many experiments. When the experiments were complete, they prepared scholarly papers documenting the lack of evidence for oakness being present in any acorn. In all the specimens examined, there was nothing the scientists could see, hear, smell, touch, or taste to indicate that an acorn was anything other than an acorn. When the acorn community heard this, they once again bowed to the priests and scientists because they knew everything. The priest then sent for the acorn prophet and turned him over to the courts. He was found guilty of unlawful challenge of the acorn hierarchy and blasphemy against the acorn priesthood. He was sentenced to death. In a very pompous and elaborate event, the acorn prophet was pushed from the tree to his death. The acorn priest did not perform the sacred ritual, and the following spring, no plant grew upon the spot where the prophet had fallen. There were a few acorns who continued to question the teachings of the acorn priest, although they felt guilty doing so. In secret meetings, they would gather to discuss and examine the written teachings of the acorn prophet had left behind. Let me do that again. There were a few acorns who continued to question the teachings of the acorn priest, although they felt guilty doing so. In secret meetings, they would gather to discuss and examine the written teachings of the acorn prophet had left behind. That's what's written. In secret meetings, they would gather to discuss and examine the written teachings the acorn prophet had left behind. Okay. Without a plan or even an intent, they began to work with the principles the prophet had spoken of. They began to tap into their oakness with silent and deliberate thought. They shifted their attention from polishing their shells to developing their oakness. Miraculously, with no special rites or ceremony, they began to feel like oaks, think like oaks, behave like oaks. In a very short time, they too began to glow. Although their luster was not as high as the priest told them it should be, they were peaceful, tranquil, loving, and seemingly wise in dealing with the pressures of acorn life. Their glow drew more and more acorns to the secret nightly meetings. Before long, there was a mighty oakness movement in the acorn community. Once again, some leery acorn tipped off the priest. They came and seized the papers of the acorn prophet from the leaders of the oak movement. They reworded the words to make them harmless and claimed to be the authors of the papers all along. The acorn priests were very careful to emphasize in the new oak document that oakness had only happened once, that the acorn prophet was the one and only example of oakness, and that all who aspired to be like him should keep their shells highly polished and pay their tithes and taxes. Despite the various efforts on the part of the acorn priest and royalty to squelch the oak movement, the acorn community continued to question. Why did they live in an oak tree? If they lived in the body of the oak, did they not have the same qualities and attributes? These wayward acorns remained convinced that it was their purpose in life to make real, to realize, and to bring forth their oakness. The acorn priest monitored them very closely. Whenever one made too much sense or caused too much of a stirring in the community, they would pay the acorn thugs to come secretly in the night, capture the unorthodox acorn, and feed it to the squirrels. They had dispensed with the public ritual of throwing acorns to the ground because the surrounding community had become flooded, unknowingly so, with hundreds of oak trees. I'll say. And this parable was adapted from the original version presented by John W. Akins in Explorations in Awareness, Lakemont, Georgia, CSA Press, 1996. So we acknowledge that author also. And again, these were readings from The Spirit of a Man, A Vision of Transformation for Black Men and the Women Who Love Them, by IYANLA VANZANT. So thank you again for allowing me to bring you these messages. I hope that they are edifying to you as they are to me. And don't forget to share these messages with other brothers and sisters, and to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know whenever I upload material. All right? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I'll be talking to you all real soon. Ashe, peace, namaste.